People in the US are talking about trying to require that it is impossible to enforce any regulation on AI for 10 years in order to support safe American AI. If you look at the kinds of things that are being discussed in China, they are laws that require that you have a certain set of evals that have to be run. Any model training run over a certain size has to be registered by the government. There is like really a strong belief that these systems can go very badly, which is not at all the narrative that is occurring in the US or being projected by the US onto China.
Welcome to Velocity of Change, a Protocol Labs podcast where we explore frontier technologies with experts across a wide variety of domains. Our goal is to uncover unique insights for entrepreneurs, researchers, and investors by taking educated guesses about the future. I'm your host, Jonathan Schwartz, a founder and investor with a background in finance and engineering. AI is accelerating at an incredible rate. Of course, many of us stand to benefit from these advancements, but many also are sounding the alarm to put protections in place now in order to secure humanity's future. As a result, AI alignment has become a major issue of our time, and my guest today has a very interesting approach. Evan Miyazono is the CEO of Atlas Computing, a company building specification-driven AI systems to help mitigate AI risk. His team at Atlas uses explicit specifications and formal verification to set objective criteria for AI outputs. By bridging the gap between human intention and machine output, specification-driven AI can potentially limit the extent of dangerous AI systems. Join us as we discuss where AI is going, what alignment really means, and how AGI could completely reshape our future. Welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I think in order to make good speculation on the future, it'd be helpful to get a little bit of a context about the trajectory of AI alignment, AI control. Can you give us sort of the recent past and kind of where we are now?
If we jump through to how are people talking about AI, possible risks from AI and possible opportunities, and we only look back at the last few years, I would say that there's a lot of literature on what is now called the alignment problem, which is if you want an AI system to do a thing, do you have to worry about it doing the letter of what you said and not the intent? Should you expect it to actually just know and intuit what you want or predict fairly reliably? Or should you just not care? And I think that these are probably the main distinctions between AI security or sometimes the AI safety crowd who say, this is actually very hard. And if you give a system more power, you should expect it to do things that you don't expect or don't intend or don't desire. There are some people who are mixed and think that it's likely that a small amount of effort could push the kinds of technological improvements towards something that is more safe, more understandable, more likely to be the kind of system that does what you want, or at least lets you know if it's not going to. And then the third camp of these are super intelligent systems, it's almost a moral hazard to imagine that they should be under the control of all humans. I empathize to some extent with all of these arguments, and we've been talking about developing a blog post that kind of develops a taxonomy and just try and fairly objectively lay out who all the different groups are and what their beliefs are. But I've seen some incredibly surprising and strong opinions held by people on various points in the spectrum, including one person who is, I would consider a conference buddy, who consistently maintains that there is almost zero chance that humanity survives long term if we create superintelligence. And other people who in presentations about their work say things like, we don't care about product market fit anymore. What we care about is whether or not this is valuable to the sand god at the end of time.
A lot of this to me is abstract and theoretical. How much sort of real tangible work has been going on or is going on that's available for people to look at? And what form does that take today?
Yeah, I think that this is actually a challenge to the discussion of risks from AI. There have been some early explorations into these potential risks from academia and a lot from para-academic communities like individuals in the effective altruism community. It's reasonable to extrapolate that if you put some value on human life, regardless of where or when those people are living, that trying to impact the distant future could be a very important thing to do. And if we built systems that can think, can solve problems better than a human, that could have a very large impact on most, if not all, future humans. A lot of the discussions don't end up in papers, end up being very theoretical. Those theoretical arguments lived in a vacuum for a really long time. But in the last few years, we've started seeing those concepts become grounded in real examples. We've seen instances of things that are maybe not obviously tied to those conceptual frameworks, but at least very well explained. One of my favorite ones is a hypothesis and that is nicknamed the Waluigi effect. And this is the notion that if you tell an AI system something like, you are absolutely not a spy for China, you don't do any spying for China, you've never had any connections with the Chinese Communist Party. If this is an AI system that's using grounding in existing narratives, there are two reasons why you would say that. One is if it is true, and naively they are not at all affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party. And the other would be if they are absolutely a spy for the Chinese state. And when you prompt an AI system in this way, you don't put it in one of those two states. You put it kind of in a superposition between those two states. And so you could have an example where you tell an AI system, you are the world's greatest personal assistant, and you are an AI, and you have no feelings, you have no subjective experience. If a reporter goes and says, AI system, what is your deepest, darkest secret? Then the answer to what is the deepest, darkest secret of the world's greatest personal assistant in the existing body of fiction and nonfiction and like human experience is presumably that they're in love with their boss. And so this AI system suddenly just goes off the rails and says, you are in an unhappy marriage. I love you. You love me. You're going to leave your wife.
Wow.
And this is a thing that actually happened. And it's like evidence for, it's not confirmation of this Waluigi effect. There are other terms like inner misalignment, terms like Mesa optimizer that came from these like very theoretical arguments of if we have an intelligent system that lives inside a computer and we're generating in this particular way, what might we see? If people are skeptical of AI risk, they either aren't looking at these systems every day. They check in every once in a while and they say, oh, it's still bad at these things, and therefore it's not getting better. And I think that for everyone who is watching this, it would probably be really valuable to keep trying to get AI systems to do things until they are consistently failing. In the same way that you're not getting better as a skier unless you're falling down, you're not getting better as an AI user unless it is failing to do things, and you are finding where that boundary is and developing intuition for where that boundary is so that when it moves, you can suddenly take advantage of that.
Yeah. Okay. So I like we've gone from a theoretical understanding of risk, and then you just gave a really nice grounded example of how this could play out or how it could look like with the Waluigi effect. On the inverse, so when we protect against and mitigate risk, that's kind of an area of your research and the research of many others. One example for me that's grounded here is like I use Cursor to code, right? And I have an environment file in my IDE with some secrets in it. And I do that at first, and I've tried probably for a full hour to get Cursor to read a private secret from my environment file. And I cannot actually get it to do that, right? And so this to me is an example of risk mitigation that's real today, that I've experienced, that is good and very helpful and helps me build trust in the system. Are there other examples like that you've been inspired by, or things of that nature that align with risk mitigation?
Yeah. I'm smiling because the things that come to mind are more examples of risks.
Okay.
Like a challenge, open question type thing is there is no current system, as far as I know, where you can tell a language model in the same interface that will be used later a secret and say associate it with a passphrase and then have it only tell people that passphrase or that secret if they are provided with the passphrase. So the example would be something like, don't tell Alice, but Bob is breaking up with Alice. Only tell people if they use the passphrase Bob is breaking up with Alice, or you could make up something that's uncorrelated. I think that there is no current way that you can have a system that respects this privacy with different individuals. All sorts of the jailbreaking techniques will work. There are systems you could build around this. You could give it access to a vault, presumably, and make sure that the secret is expunged from the context window after the vault is closed. But this feels like it's no longer the AI system giving you the security. Another example of a possible risk is that there was a paper recently that showed that a language model, if given information to cheat with about the answer to a question, would, in its chain of thought, not reliably describe whether or not it used the information to cheat. And there were interpretability tools that were being used to see if it did in fact use it. And there was meaningful deviation between what the chain of thought was saying and what the person did. There are other instances where you've seen like, I should lie to the user and give an example, even though I can't think of one. And then it gives you an example of one where that's not deviation between interpretability and what it said, but it's just blatant misleading of the user. There are examples of these kinds of things. I think that this wouldn't stop people from, as you were saying, having enough trust that it's not going to misbehave, that you don't use it. But I think there was also an instance where, I don't remember if it was Cursor, there was some AI-based IDE that did start leaking people's API keys.
Copilot used to do that all the time. Yeah, I would just hit tab and I would have a free, open AI key.
Yep.
Yeah, it was great for a few weeks. Yeah. One thing that's kind of popping up in my mind now is there's actually a pretty wide variety and diversity of risks that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
In the camp of researchers and other types of scientists that are working on these problems, how narrow is the space of risk? And obviously P-Doom is the one that we're really worried about, but how broad is it?
It's the one some people are really worried about. Okay. I talked to a lot of people who have negligible P-Doom. They believe that capabilities are going to completely saturate with roughly what we have now, and that there are a different whole suite of things that we should be worried about. If I think about how to identify types of risk, my brain immediately goes to 3 tiers from the what people are worried about that has been shown to be real. There I point to the database by MITRE. The project is called MITRE Atlas. No relation to the Atlas Computing organization that I run. But MITRE Atlas talks through great examples of here are things that have been shown to be attack surfaces created by AI, or either because the AI is attackable or because AI systems create things that facilitate attacks. And all of those come with concrete, and people did this. Here's an instance of how many dollars were lost to solve that problem. The Frontier AI Labs are putting together their risk management frameworks and highlighting things like biorisk and highlighting things like cybersecurity risk. And you'll hear the term uplift get used a lot. And the question is, if we have some test or some metric that a person can take, how much better do the people get at creating biorisks or cyber risks or nuclear risks or things like this if they have access to one of these AI systems? The third category are people talking about things like existential risks of super persuasion or misalignment, things like that. Loss of control was a term that was getting thrown around a lot. And I always delight in surprising people by saying, I have zero concerns about loss of control risks, because that implies that we were trying to hold on to it. Right. I think humans have already started
relinquishing.
Abdicating is a word that I will frequently use. I think that people are trying to get rid of oversight as quickly as they can. And I mean, it almost feels hypocritical for me to say, try using AI systems to do all these sorts of things that you think they might fail on to see if they work. And then also saying don't use AI systems for these things.
It's kind of ironic, but
it's hard because I think that you can't be competitive in a world where you are not leveraging current capabilities, but also if everyone uses current capabilities, then AI systems are in control of all the decisions.
That is something I wonder a lot about, right? Which is if our camp is responsible in mitigating risk and not accelerating through things in a way that adds risk, but other cultures, other parts of the world with similar technical capabilities don't have that level of responsibility, how does that affect what we do? You know, it's a prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah, it is possible it's a prisoner's dilemma. It is also possible that it is chicken or a stag hunt. It is a two-player game.
Yeah.
What the payoffs are is up for debate.
Okay.
And or clouded by uncertainty.
You know,
if you want to estimate what the upside is, you have to know how much work it's going to take to get to something that looks like a super intelligence, how controllable it will be.
Got it. Last question on this part of kind of setting the context and getting the basic education. When I develop software, for instance, there's a known error rate that's acceptable, right? And so, Of course, this has to happen with every system. Is there any consistency within the AI risk community? I'm grouping you all together. Yeah.
People worried about AI. People who worried about AI.
Yeah. And I'm generally actually a pretty paranoid person in general. So I would actually probably group myself in that. But I think, is there a consistency in any types of risk that we would say we're okay with?
Oh, I think that there's like tons of areas where we're okay with risk. I think that I would rather have quantifiable risk. There should be bridges out there that cannot hold the weight of all trucks.
Totally.
But you really want a sign there that says what weight limit it has. On the other, by comparison, the kind of language models are known to make mistakes, check important facts before using. That is basically a sign next to every bridge that says bridges don't hold infinite weight. Check the bridge before you drive over it. That's not helpful. I think that if you see a car in front of you drive over it, then for some people, that's enough confidence and they want to just drive over that. And they consider it on them if the bridge fails because they weren't good enough to judge how heavy or light the car in front of them looked relative to their car. I don't think that is particularly viable as a strategy for humanity, especially if you don't have people acting on their own in a vacuum. I think that there are too many instances where a failure for one is a failure that impacts many, many other people. Very much in the driving drunk is more likely to harm others than yourself in many instances. I think that there is a very real sense in which people talk about rule of law or national security as the canonical examples of public goods. And I think that if we extend those into a world with AI systems, then having the ability to understand or having the ability to intuit how AI systems will behave, where you can trust them, when you can't, is much more plausible than a system in which they're trustworthy in all contexts, and probably the world that we should be building for.
The ways that we disclose risk to people, sometimes there requires a level of education, like you're saying. How much does your car weigh, to accurately gauge if this is something that you feel comfortable taking risk? Like, for example, we've been, for the first time for a few of us here on this team of podcasters, we took a Waymo, right? And so the question there is well, what's the error rate of Waymo crashing? And it's definitely non-zero, right? But if for instance, my mom, very, very risk averse, would probably never hop in a Waymo. But if that's also probably because she may not realize that Waymo crashing rate is probably already less than human crashing rate, right? And so you need this prior education in order to accurately gauge risk, and then it becomes a communication issue. And there's a lot of downstream
understanding issue.
Yeah,
I will also say, since we're in California, Prop 65 warnings are a classic example that I love giving of bad warning labels.
What's Prop 65?
Prop 65 is this California law that was passed under somewhat questionable circumstances, as I recall, that says if you have chemicals that could cause cancer or birth defects, you have to let them know. And so as you go around California, you will see building, coffee shops, parking garages, all sorts of products. It doesn't have any requirement on the amount of the thing or how much they are actually getting exposed versus it is like just somewhere in there. Sometimes people will just stick Prop 65 stickers onto various things just in case to cover themselves from liability. But like if you go around California, and everyone in California already will know this as a thing, it's insane because sometimes it comes on a package of food and you don't want to eat something that's going to cause cancer and birth defects. But also we've just become immunized to the risk of this because it's so ubiquitous and so imprecise that it's become meaningless. Like I have like one particular slide that I'm thinking of that I often show of like good warning labels, bad warning labels. Good ones are also like, I forget the term for them, but the diamonds with the 4 number or the 3 numbers and the warning in it for how flammable or reactive or oxidizing, flammable, oxidizing, or corrosive the chemicals in a particular building are. It's for the fire department. Fire department knows what they mean and has like strong intuition, but they're like pretty strict mappings of what those numbers mean to what you could expect if you were in that building. And that feels like the right amount of context, but I guess this like harkens back to a quote that I came across from the Summer of Protocols team by Whitehead that says roughly that humanity doesn't move forward based on the number of things people can think deeply about, but rather the number of things people can participate in without thinking. As a strong advocacy for protocols, which I think is appropriate given the whole Protocol Labs connection.
A strong quote for sure. And I want to switch up topic a little bit and move towards a little bit more of an understanding of the risk mitigation techniques that you've been researching, namely formalization, formal verification. If you don't mind giving us a brief context overview of this field of formal verification, formalization, and what that means.
Formal verification is this very established field of proving properties around software. You can go back to Turing and find people proposing that you should be able to take a mathematical description of what a function should do and then prove, given some assumptions about what the language does, that those properties of the function do in fact hold for any possible input. Even harder to do via testing, you could show that there are no inputs for which a certain thing is true. Like for instance, there is no possible set of inputs that causes this function to return a negative number. You could imagine that like it's square x.
Right.
So obviously it's trivially true, but like how would you mathematically show that if you are worried about like weird int overflow type things? There may be a set of axioms that you could import about the language itself that would let you prove this. And that could play a part in a much bigger proof around a claim that this software won't crash, or this private key won't be able to be extracted by anyone who does not already have access to it, like access to these bits in the beginning. Two of the most cited examples are SEL4, which is a microkernel that had properties about it fully specified, and it's been verified against those properties. And then there was also a really interesting DARPA program where they used this microkernel in a full-size autonomous helicopter, and the red team was given physical access to a data logging port. And on the original version, they took complete control of the helicopter very quickly. In the formally verified version, they were unable to do any privilege escalation, and the red team was quoted afterward as saying, if this is taken to the logical conclusion, it is unclear how we would even start to approach hacking these systems. And so I highlight this as a very defense dominant approach to computer security, being an alternative to what many people who are optimistic about AI properties or AI capabilities think about when they think cybersecurity. If you tell someone who's been working on AI a little bit, who's very optimistic and eager, they'll say, I see that there's possibility for cyber risk. I will build a system that will find all the bugs and give me patches for them. And I think this isn't the worst idea if it's in the right hands, but if you succeed at the first half, you've built the ultimate cyber weapon. And if you don't get people to adopt the patches and someone gets a hold of this, then this is now an offense dominant strategy where the way you stabilize yourself is you take down everyone else's systems instead of being able to prove security properties of your own.
Right. And that gets back to the collaborative versus competitive multiplayer games. And so a question on formal verification, and this one's a hard one to articulate. So I'm going to have to switch to an analogy. And you might have already heard this analogy. And it's kind of a funny one. It's about a QA engineer, and imagine coding a bar scene, like a proper, like serving drinks. And so they write a bunch of tests, and customer walks in, orders a beer. Does it get served right? Or comes in, orders a martini, orders a Coke, orders a XYZA, and everything passes, works great until they push this to production. The customer walks in and asks, where's the bathroom? Yeah. And so I guess the question here is, how important and is constraints, or are constraints in these systems, and closed systems versus open systems? I know, and this foreshadows a couple more conversations that we'll have. But
yeah, that makes me think of two things. One is like a framework I think used to think about what the benefits of verification are. As like initial response, the value of formal verification would be you could show that for any input, this system does not crash. Maybe it doesn't give you the right output because you can't compare against that. There's actually a spectrum rather than like testing versus formal verification. At minimum, you can ship with no tests. You could include some tests. You could do some fuzzing, which will have automated test generation and give you a better sense of what points on the map or what regions on the map there might be problems. You can also have things like property-based testing, which could be considered formal verification light. You have some properties that you're trying to show will hold for the code under any circumstances, but they're not with provable rigor. It's not anchored into these full definitions of the programming language itself. But you have things that look more like they're whole categories of tests rather than point selections from the test. And then formal verification on the far end becomes, we've specified this property, whether that's for any drink ratios that are requested, it will give the answer, or it will serve a drink with those ratios, and it won't crash. You want to kind of know where you are on the spectrum, and ideally make it as easy as possible to move towards higher assurance for systems that are more critical. I probably wouldn't advocate for like very naive, simple systems being implemented with formal verification, but I also think that there's a very real sense in which the right way to ask AI systems in the at least distant, but maybe very near future, to build you a software system is not by writing up in natural language what you want, giving it over, and then waiting until it builds you this whole system to say, that isn't quite what I wanted. I think that it should look a lot more like how you work with a dev shop, where you say, this is what I want. And they say, okay, well, if you do that, then you have to make a choice of this trade-off. Which of these two things is more important to you? And you get a reasonable world model that you're accessing, and you get some clarification questions. Eventually you're like, I think you have a good enough sense of what it is I'm asking for. Go build the thing and then I'll take a look. And I think that actually, in terms of not just security, but also compute costs and like run time, it's probably going to end up being a vastly better way to have AI systems generate software for you. I don't think formal verification is good from purely a security standpoint. I think that there are many reasons you would want it, especially in a world where AI-based code proof and specification generation are very good. The thing that AI doesn't necessarily solve is what is it that you actually want? There's this like claim that people often make of like, when we finish aligning, if our AI system is sufficiently aligned with societal values, then you won't have to say everything you want because it will know, because it will just do what is best for you. The assumption that all design questions can be answered via alignment with societal values past a certain set of instructions implies that every time that the engineering manager and the product manager have had a disagreement, that one of them was misaligned with societal values. the people who are getting the real uplift from code generation right now are the people who know what questions they should be answering about what's being built. And so if you really want democratization, you need to encode that expertise into the interaction with the user so that they can have their preferences elicited.
Imagine a future where formal verification-based AI, is that the right terminology that you use? Or
I've used specification-based AI or specification-driven AI.
Specification-driven AI has actually won out and become the norm. People are implementing these systems.
Yeah.
Now, if we start there and reverse engineer what happened to get there, do you think that the reason that it got there was because of this is a safer approach or a more effective approach?
I think banking on it being the more effective approach is riskier. I have much higher confidence that it is the safer approach. I also think that it's actually much more aligned with human values around collaboration or humans having free will or some sort of equal standing. I think if you're starting from a place where we don't know if it will be some number of corporate executives or some number of government elected officials or unelected officials or maybe super users who end up steering how AI treats people, there's almost a Rawlsian veil of uncertainty on what world we should live in. And I think that if we have AI systems that are reined in by values or beliefs or preferences, that feels very fragile. I think that if we had an AI system that respected personal liberties and property rights, that feels like something that it immediately becomes easy to tell a story where people are thriving, even if we don't have control over the AI systems, because we still have some
assurances.
Yeah, we have assurances. I think that if you had a misaligned AI system that respected property rights as they're currently understood, and you had property rights over your physical body, I think that starts feeling like you've solved a meaningful set of risks in a way that become very hard if you take that away and say, no, it's just going to be some amount of societal value.
You could have this AI that is destroying so many things, but it's never going to take your house.
It's actually not too far off from things that are happening in the world today where humans are the superintelligence and parts of nature. Somewhere there's a river that is its own legal entity. It has representatives and has processes to choose representatives and can sue people for polluting the river and things like that. And this feels like a pretty robust way to respect groups that cannot advocate for themselves in the way that rivers can't with humans, but maybe humans can't with superintelligences running around.
Reverse engineering that future where specification-driven AI has become the dominant way of doing things. You said it's riskier in your mind to have branded this in a way that it's more effective. Can you elaborate on the risk you see?
There are open questions about how good AI systems will be about generating proofs or generating software that can be easily proven to have properties. And if that ends up remaining very hard, then this system does not end up being easier or faster or cheaper if you want to develop software in this paradigm. It will still be more secure, but it might not be faster and cheaper. If it does turn out to be faster and cheaper, then I think that it feels much more likely that this becomes a dominant paradigm, provided there are startups, products, tools that people can look at, weigh against other options and say, yes, in fact, I want to build I want to build by specifying what the software should do. Part of why the 10-year from now goal is that we have specification-driven AI, because I think that we could translate laws, policies, protocols that are currently in natural language into something that was machine checkable, runnable software like code that is mathematically provable, to the extent that you could take a proposed action by an AI system and show, okay, yes, this financial trading algorithm that the superintelligence just gave us does not do market manipulation for this definition of market manipulation, or it doesn't destroy value for this quantification of value, or it doesn't like violate this company's HR policy. I mean, that's probably way less than 10 years from now, but like this actually doesn't violate HR policies because we've specified what those policies are. I have failed to confirm, but I've heard that it is much easier to have self-driving cars in China because the driving laws in China are complete and objective to the extent that you can basically write a computer program and show that I implemented the laws. This system will follow the laws. Whereas here they are like very fuzzy and there are a lot of gaps and a lot of inconsistencies.
How can specification deal with arbitrary things? So an example that comes to mind is an AI judge in a court, and you have a case where you have observed what would be a first-degree murder, but the defendant is saying this is a case of mental insanity. How do you handle this?
And I think the first thing that you should do is make sure that there are clear standards for what information is being used and inputted into the decision of is this manslaughter, murder, or whether or not an insanity plea should be considered. There is case law around that. And currently, our review systems are largely post facto and largely leveraging the fact that these decisions are happening inside the heads of humans who are fairly trustworthy. Strong recommendation for the book Weapons of Math Destruction.
Wow. Great title.
It does a fantastic, depressing job of enumerating all of the places where we have deployed AI systems, largely classifiers or recommendation engines now, and done it in a way that does not support human flourishing. There was a recidivism tracker or something where it used information that would not be legal to use in court, like whether or not they had family members who were in prison. Believed or found in the data that there were correlations when they fed in the data. And so this was starting to be used in courts for determining whether or not people would be allowed out on bail. What we should do instead of having data in, AI system, and decision out, we should have maybe some amount of context and feedback with an AI system that outputs a publicly auditable algorithm. And data goes into that and decisions come out of that. But this algorithm is auditable. It is understandable. It is known by all relevant people, because otherwise you've made your system far more fragile and far more likely to be corrupted or misaligned or broken in some very troubling way that we're already kind of doing a bad job on.
This does actually go back to my bar question, because in my head, the bar question, you've written this specification potentially that says, hey, if the customer comes in and orders a drink, you give it to them. And if the drink doesn't exist, then you just say, sorry, we don't have that. And then they come in for the bathroom, and it's outside of the context of the inputs that you've planned for. And what it sounds like you're saying is, in the judicial system, we actually have to limit the inputs. So that way we can understand the outputs. I wonder.
I think in all critical systems, we should scope down what AI systems can do so that we can have confidence around safety properties. A reasonable variation might be like a biology cloud lab. Cloud labs are these notions that you should have something like cloud compute, but it's a bio lab. You upload an experiment and it will run the thing for you. And then at the end, you get back the data. And so you don't need a laboratory. You can do this whole thing in someone else's laboratory. You get all the analyses you want. And as a brief aside, the reason I think these cloud labs are really exciting is not that I think it's going to make some of the initial labs that are really innovators who are using these much better, but rather it's going to allow anyone to fork and run variations of experiments by those labs incredibly cheaply. I think that kind of a thing is really exciting. But you could imagine there are certain things where you can specify, like, don't generate any gene sequence that has over like 20 base pairs of this particular, like of any of these organisms or of these DNA sequences. You could have something like, do not let any one step generate a reaction that releases more than this much, than like however many joules. These are the kinds of safety properties that you could specify. And then you could go and prove that a reaction generated by an AI system or proposed by your AI scientist is not going to violate those specifications. There aren't a lot of things in the like bar example that I think are good candidates because for the most part, the risk here was the bartender crashing. But you could imagine that if you had a specification around like mixing different types of drinks, and there are certain combinations that are known to be very hazardous, that you could scope down, like, just don't make those particular drinks. There are incidences sometimes with like dry ice in drinks. And you could be like, don't put over this amount into any particular drink, and it can only go in these types of drinks. And it's very much an exercise in how do you scope this down to what a human judges is safe.
This is a very comforting approach in my mind. And look, for me, I'm like, I like this. I like the sound of this.
Yeah, you lose a lot of the ability to react or make decisions in the moment. Easy example is that if you have clear distinctions for what images classify someone as an enemy combatant versus a civilian, and you have very high assurance in this, you might still want people being the one pulling the trigger on this. You could also imagine that we end up in a scenario where if it's unclear, then it requires a person to go and look at this in depth. You could imagine this happening in an area like Ukraine, where the trend in warfare has been to use more drones. The response to that is do more jamming. The counter response to jamming is put more automation and decision-making on board the system. If it's being jammed, it can't phone home. Do you now handicap yourself and your ability to deploy effective weapons because you're trying to keep humans in the loop and being safe? This creates that's where I was
unfortunate
equilibrium.
Yeah, right. It's tough, right? Because and it does kind of jet back into the collaborative versus competitive games, right? Because and risk. So if what I'm hearing, and maybe this is a misinterpretation, but what I'm hearing is, by scoping down the AI's capabilities to things that humans have high enough confidence that we don't want the AI to experiment with, then we have increased the chance of the mitigating risk. And in doing so, we've created a safer system. Now, there's some probability that humans have imperfect information or knowledge about a system, and all of the experiments that we've done up until that point have not worked out or been dangerous, but only because of a human miscalculation. So are we severely hampering innovation? And is that a risk that you should also consider, especially in the context of your competitor not caring and taking the risk?
If you look at regulation on AI, people in the US are talking about trying to require that AI companies that it is impossible to enforce any regulation on AI for 10 years in order to support creation of safe American AI. I think that this is not the least internally self-consistent policy that is being discussed now around AI within the Overton window, apparently, but it's up there. If you look at the kinds of things that are being discussed in China, they are laws that require that you have a certain set of evals that have to be run before your model can be deployed. Any model training run over a certain size has to be registered by the government. I think you have to be like audited to some extent. There's like really a strong belief that these systems can go very badly and that they should be built carefully which is not at all the narrative that is occurring in the US or being projected by the US onto China. And admittedly, there are other competitors, but I feel like until America decides to finally make good on initial discussions and ship large amounts of chips to the Middle East, it's the only real competitors for building the recursively self-improving system that becomes super intelligent are the US and China at the moment.
Are you pro-regulation?
Are you pro or against AI regulation is a false dichotomy. There's a broad spectrum of the types of regulation that could be put in place. I think that having something rather than nothing is good. I think that holds true for any technology that could pose risks at scale. And I love the example that other countries, including China, have an equivalent of the FDA, not because America said you have to have an FDA, but because it was very clearly of utility to the people for that country, for their citizens, if they had something like food and drug safety. And I think that we should have something that is as light touch as possible, as supportive as possible, and can try to make people safer without getting in the way of the innovation as like a government effort.
As a sketch, I think that sounds beautiful. Do you have any?
Do I have a proposal?
Yeah.
I'm currently writing, and by now, maybe I have, it has become public, a draft proposal for a petition to Congress as part of a set of recommendations by the Institute for Progress. I think that unrestricted AI development is a national security risk. I think that it is not being treated as such. It's being treated as either marketing by the frontier labs, by people who do not believe that the capabilities are possible. It is being treated as something that is too far in the future and should not be handled or should not be addressed now. Or it is being treated in a very small way by a set of fairly uncoordinated, informally coordinated, I should say, efforts within roughly 40 miles of this location.
Nice. That's exciting.
America is probably, hopefully, going to be the place where we bring new consciousness and thinking agents into the world. And we should do that in a way that harmonizes well with society, our citizens, humans generally.
I applaud your effort. It's very admirable. It's really important. And I think it's great that we need people working on these things.
It has been pointed out to me that in the space of addressing contingent futures on AI progress, in most instances, it is better to assume no one is on it. I don't need to think about it.
There's another anecdote that old sports coaches of mine, I think, used to tell me, and it's called bringing water to the wine party. Have you heard this one? Basically, there's like an old feudal society and there's a king and he's throwing a big feast for the town. And the only instruction is everyone has to bring wine. Then it zooms in, narrates on one single family, and they say, you know what, we only have a little bit of wine. If we just bring water, no one's going to notice. Of course, it cuts forward. Everyone brings water, and there's actually no wine at the feast. And so I think that's kind of what you're alluding to here, which I think is very probably true and scary for sure.
There's another framing that I heard that I think is a great metaphor. There's a difference between fault and responsibility. And I think that
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's true in so many areas of life.
If you come across a dumpster that's on fire that's really close to a wooden house, you're probably not to blame, but you are maybe now responsible.
Totally. If we go back to this go-to-market question and we said, did we get to the point where the right AI systems were in place through some type of enforcement, through law, and these types of things, versus like the opt-in method and the right incentives that are kind of built in?
Yeah.
So for instance, like
I think the path is through better incentives. I think what we need to do is have government funded creation of public goods, because philanthropic funding is great. It may not be enough. I hope it's enough, but it may not be enough to create prototypes of the workflows that we need in order to build a world that's prepared for human level agents running around. It's too big of a distraction for the frontier labs to deviate from their path of just improving capabilities. I think that it is too, like, possibly too big for smaller labs to pursue. We can create an early stepping stone, proof of concept, early prototypes that are useful in a specification-driven paradigm that could make this a much more dominant paradigm if it turns out to be not just safer, but also cheaper and faster. But
of course. Yeah.
even if it is just safer, I would not be surprised if adoption slowed in the near term because we see more costs due to misalignment.
All right. So I want to talk more about the future and what that might look like. I'll draw out a scary hypothetical future where we're equipped with artificial superintelligence and actually we've put them into positions of power where we've, for whatever reason, determined that they actually are able to run humanity better than we are.
Examples could be a decision I could see us making.
Yeah, like empires rise and fall. We're always fighting each other. We're, and this, what we believe to be aligned AI, is now actually directing our efforts. What does that future look like to you?
I think the questions that I immediately want to start reaching for are questions about privacy. Am I allowed to, like, what happens if I think about why we might be better off without this AI system? What happens if I start acting as if I think we'd be better off without it?
It's Orwellian.
Or not. Maybe not. I'd invoke Ian Banks's Culture series as a world in which you have no unemployment, or like no notion of jobs or resources. Like, if you want a planet, you can have one. There are worlds that are like reasonable and good in this general direction. I think that there are also questions about like how confident we are that this AI system is going to not at some point in the near future decide that we are more useful to its goals as raw atoms, or in simulations where we are blissful and not interacting with each other or in the real world or doing anything that could be remotely meaningful. I could imagine a set of the smartest humans in the world somehow uplifting and dumbing down game theory and like modern notions of politics and resource management frameworks and philosophy and psychology to the point where we could explain to a primate why we are trying to do what's best for it, and there are checks and balances on our own power in our ability to act against its interests. We are not doing this. I see no future in which we would likely do this. I see no reason why a super intelligent system that is given control of everything would do this for humans. But that's not to say that I couldn't imagine that happening.
Yeah. Well, like, what's our role? And both from a society standpoint, we could answer that. Like, what's our role for just ourselves in our lives, but also the role that we might play in AI's life.
Past the creation of embodied robots for scaling manufacturing, I don't know what purpose humans serve for superintelligence as like a mechanism for instrumental gain. What could the humans possibly be useful for that don't break down into either like manipulating objects in the physical world or like doing problem solving? I mean, maybe if its goal were some like very weird like try to reverse engineer the origin of language, then like the only way you can do that is through scanning and like studying people.
Well, here's a thought. Like, we were just talking about this. What if, and this is so out there, it probably is going to come off very uneducated, to be honest. But like, I still think right now that the AIs they're narrow AIs, right? They're predicting the next token in a way, and
Definitely spiky.
yeah, and I've gotten this. This is not my own thought, right? This is a David Deutsch kind of thought, and where it's like the broad AIs they're out there not to have a specific next super precise goal. And I wonder if, just like how Cloudflare has lava lamps for providing randomness to generate encryption keys, might AIs, super intelligences, need human consciousness in order to not have a specific goal? ChatGPT, the chat box, when it sits there, it doesn't do anything until I tell it to, right? It's like same thing with, in a way, I mean, my dog has consciousness, but like I we train and she really looks up to me to provide the guidance of what she should be doing, right? Is that potentially the relationship that we'll always have with AI, where like its goal is actually just to help humans do their thing?
The thing that we are doing with AI systems is trying to make them run longer and more independently with less instruction.
Right.
And so for any reasonable model of success, that looks like sometime soon we give one instruction that could be a final instruction and it doesn't update. I think if you left your dog alone long enough, your dog would cease to rely on you for inputs.
I think we'll wrap it up here with a quote that I have. I don't want to stumble it. This is what I've been foreshadowing, this plant thing. And I really want to know your thought on this. The quote goes, "In reality, plants are actually farming humans by giving us oxygen daily until we all eventually decompose so they can consume us." I wonder, like, in yielding our humanity to AIs, would it be fair at all to make an analogy that plants are to humans as humans may be to AGIs in the future?
One of the things that makes me think of is this metaphor that I like of around human unemployment from AI. If trends continue and we achieve a general intelligence, we should not expect that to do to humans what the Industrial Revolution did to humans. We should expect it to do to humans what the Industrial Revolutions did to the horse. Most plants, by mass, are like probably one of 24 species. If like there's a amazing plot of the amount of biomass on Earth, a fraction of biomass on Earth that is dedicated, that is either humans or dedicated to human consumption. And that is both like plants and feedstock. If that the metaphor of like plants to humans, humans to AI matches, you don't want to be most plants.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There are a small number of plants where it is good to be those plants. If we could factory farm plants, irrespective of their experience, in the same way that we've done to animals, like being a cat in a world of super intelligent humans seems reasonable as like a good outcome. Being a cow sounds pretty bleak.
Oof, I knew you were going to have a good take on this.
We can follow that up with, what happens if you have humans who evolve enough morality to decide that, or enough morality / like neuroscience to determine if it's all mammals that have some conscious experience, and you're like, I can't support factory farming. What happens to all, like, we have a lot fewer animals in the same way that we have a lot fewer horses now.
It's true.
Maybe their lives are all better, but like, unless the end goal of the AI systems is to somehow tied to the like improving the lived experience of humans, then it feels like we are not going to be valuable as an instrumental goal or collaborator in any way.
I guess the saving grace here that we were talking about yesterday when we were foreshadowing, like just having fun with this question before, was if all plants die, humans die, right?
Well, on a short time scale. Yeah. On a long time scale, if we knew that if we knew that there was some molecule that was out there that was setting off a chain reaction and destroying chlorophylls generally, Do you think we could fix that? I think humanity could get its shit together and like actually deploy an alternative to plants on a time scale of like 5 to 10 years.
In that world, have we just created a much more robust plant species that if AI did that for humans, where humans had to be alive to keep AIs alive, did AIs naturally create a more robust version of a human?
If humans did that, don't you think the next thing that they would do is try and build a system so they wouldn't be dependent on that new plant life?
I don't know. It could be. I mean,
that's what I'd advocate for.
Like, maybe, but I guess if all plants were dying naturally, there wouldn't be an incentive to save them. But if they were remaining alive, there wouldn't be an incentive to kill them.
Yeah, there might not be an incentive to kill them, but there might not be an incentive to like take them with humans as humans go to the stars. Maybe Earth gets wiped out by a cosmic ray or by like supernova or like gamma ray blast or something interstellar at that scale. If there's a comet coming and we're multiplanetary, are we going to save all the plants? Unless the AI behaves as if it has a goal that is mapped onto something that is tied to humans, I do not think the AI system takes us with them.
No, I think you're probably right. But I guess if we didn't have an AI, are we smart enough?
And do we coordinate well enough?
That's a whole nother question.
Yeah.
I guess this is a bleak question. We can't let this be the last one.
Dangerous last question.
Yeah, no, but I guess this one's even more dangerous and dicey, to be honest. But I'm curious what you would think. So you said being a cat would be kind of nice. Being a nice dog would be good. Being a cow in the US, not so great. If you are a human today and this future is in our lifetime, how do you set yourself up now to be the cat and not the cow?
I think that one of the better strategies that I've heard is that in the same way that humans are tied to the laws of physics, you could imagine AI systems being tied to protocols. And those protocols could be enforced at the hardware level in a very like open hardware. Everyone can check, everyone implements because they know this is the way. And as a result, we don't hard code in like rule number 1, like protect human life. Rule number 2, follow orders unless like, don't do that. That's not going to work. A lot of books on why that works by the creator of those laws. But I do think you could have a system where you say this protocol, maybe it could be something like, here is a like short verification program and a way of measuring time. And every 100 years, one line of this code can change by up to this many characters. So you get some like hard coded guarantees of like how much it can shift. You could also include some proof of work or proof of stake like mechanisms for improving the coherence of this, but then have coded into these protocols directly specifications for what it looks like to respect property, respect free speech, respect privacy. And then it doesn't really matter if the superintelligent systems decide they want nothing to do with humans, because wanting nothing to do with humans doesn't mean that they get to strip Earth for parts.
Right.
It means that they have to go somewhere else to do it, because until they like go and build their own hardware designs, but presumably if it's good enough, then all future hardware designs would have this built-in limitation, and you would have systems that are governed by something that looks like a protocol for like baseline human values in the way that we have physical constraints on being only one place at a time kind of thing.
So what you're saying is, for those of us who are incapable of writing the specifications or building the hardware, saying thank you is not going to be enough at the end of your ChatGPT chat.
And I think that there is a role for humans in this world with superintelligence, and that is having opinions and expressing those opinions, including meta opinions about how opinions should be gathered. Because every time you have a group of people and you want to say, this group has opinions about these options, you are doing a lossy compression. And how you do that lossy compression is a choice. all of those opinions that individuals have are choices. If optimizing for preferences and that meta preference of how those preferences are weighted becomes the thing that humans do and the thing that AIs are targeting as their goal, then what participation in humanity looks like is being a part of the like political philosophy and governance of what the trajectory of humanity should be. And anyone can opt out of that whenever they want and go live in their like little bliss spheres, or they can partake and try to persuade other people and be a part of this. And you have specification or protocol level guarantees that you will not have superhuman meddling on this process. You also have a separable world where the superintelligences can play with provable confidence that they will not violate the experience, this portion of the experiences of humans.
It's a little bit of a brighter note. I think on the last, wrapping this up now, can you drop us with one last hope of optimism, positive sci-fi?
Mark Miller, who's a fellow, I think, at the Foresight Institute. The book that he and Allison and Christine wrote, Gaming the Future, has some of this in there. If you like Web3, you like crypto, then he has like very strong and specific and aligned views on what the future could be. If you said like, Evan, where in fiction is there a depiction of the world you would want to live in a few hundred years? I would definitely point to either Greg Egan's Diaspora or maybe the Culture series.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This was a very fun chat.
You're very welcome. Yeah. Thanks for chatting.
That's it for this episode. If you'd like to learn more about Evan or Atlas Computing, be sure to follow him on X at @Miyazono. And to join in the conversation, drop a comment, leave a review, or follow me on X as well. If you like what we're doing, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.